The river remembers everything. Ink-dark water slides through moonlit reeds, carrying whispers of dynasties, the weight of golden crowns, the prayers of workers hauling limestone blocks beneath a sun that burns white as bleached bone. Along its banks, where black earth meets sand the color of honey and amber, a civilization rose so slowly that no single generation could perceive its growing, like watching a papyrus stem reach toward light. The air here tastes of river silt and distant rain, of bread baking in clay ovens, of frankincense curling upward from temple braziers. Before there were pyramids, before anyone conceived of stacking stone toward heaven, there were only villages breathing with the river's rhythm. Each year the Nile rose and spread itself across the land like a generous hand opening, bringing soil from the heart of mountains no Egyptian had ever seen. The flooding came with such perfect regularity that time itself was measured by it. Ake, the season of inundation, when water covered the fields and fishermen pulled their nets through shallows that sparkled with silver scales. Parate, the season of emergence, when water withdrew and farmers pressed seeds into damp earth still cool from the river's touch. This is Egypt in the hour between sunset and true darkness, when the western cliffs glow rose and violet, when the first stars appear like seeds scattered across indigo silk. Let yourself settle into this threshold time, this place where day dissolves into dream. The villages grew, slowly, over generations measured not in years, but in the rising and falling of water. They merged into kingdoms. In the north, where the river split into many channels wandering through marshlands thick with papyrus and lotus, the kingdoms united under the red crown of Lower Egypt. Shimu, the season of harvest, when grain stood golden under hammering heat, and the desert wind carried sand that settled on everything like powdered sunlight. Then came a king from the south, a man whose name has echoed through such vast stretches of time that its original sound has been worn smooth like a stone in the river current. Narmer, some call him. Menes say others. He looked northward across the fertile valley with eyes that saw not separate kingdoms, but a single land, unified and whole. In the south, where the river flowed narrow and strong between desert cliffs, they formed Upper Egypt beneath the white crown. These two lands existed separately for so long that their divisions seemed eternal, seemed woven into the fabric of the world itself. In those earliest dynasties, the concept of Pharaoh was still taking shape, still crystallizing like salt left behind when flood water evaporates. The Pharaoh was not merely a powerful man who commanded armies and collected tribute in grain and gold. He was something stranger, something that existed in the space between human and divine. His armies moved through the fields and along the riverbanks, bringing the northern territories under his control, joining red crown and white into one double crown that symbolized dominion over both lands. That moment of unification, when two became one, marks a beginning. Everything that follows flows from it like water from an inexhaustible source. The early pharaohs built their capital at Memphis, where the narrow valley opened into the broad delta, where Upper and Lower Egypt met. White limestone palaces rose there, blazing brilliant in the relentless sun, their surfaces polished smooth as water. Officials moved through columned halls where air hung cool and dim, where the babble of scribes at their work mixed with the rustle of papyrus scrolls, the scratch of reed pens against clay and stone. The living Horus, they called him the falcon god incarnate, walking among mortals in human form. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of divine decree. When he extended his hand to bless or curse, the gods themselves moved through his gesture. To stand in his presence was to stand at the boundary between the mortal world and eternity. Life moved at the pace of the river, at the pace of planting and harvest, at the slow, inexorable rhythm of seasons turning. Centuries passed like clouds drifting across the desert sky, and gradually the institution of Pharaoh grew more elaborate, more refined, accumulating layers of ritual and symbolism the way river silt accumulates in delta channels. It was Djoser who first dreamed of building toward heaven, who wanted his tomb to pierce the sky. His architect, Imhotep, a man of such genius that later generations would worship him as a god, designed the step pyramid at Saqqara, that magnificent structure of platforms stacked one atop another, each one smaller than the last, rising nearly 200 feet into air that shimmers with heat. Outside, the city breathed and pulsed with life, craftsmen hammering at copper and gold, women grinding grain between stones worn concave by generations of use, children running barefoot through narrow streets, their laughter sharp as bird calls. The old kingdom emerged, that golden age when stone architecture reached heights that would not be surpassed for millennia. Building such monuments required resources on a scale difficult for the mind to grasp. Thousands of workers, not slaves despite what later tales would claim, but farmers who came during inundation when their fields lay underwater, who received rations of bread and beer, garlic and onions, who believed deeply that their labor served something sacred. Imagine standing at its base, looking upward along those massive limestone blocks, feeling the weight of ambition made solid, made permanent. The stone holds the warmth of countless suns absorbed during countless days. It smells of dust and age and the dry breath of the desert that surrounds it. Khufu commissioned the largest pyramid, the Great Pyramid of Giza, and for more than 20 years the work continued. Millions of limestone blocks, each weighing as much as 2 oxen, were quarried and hauled and lifted and placed with precision so exact that millennia later you cannot slip a knife blade between them. They lived in workers' villages, sleeping in mud brick houses that stayed cool even when the sun turned the outside world molten. At night, they sat in doorways, eating their evening meal, telling stories, singing songs passed down through generations, looking up at stars that seemed close enough to touch in that desert air, so dry it pulls moisture from skin and breath. Deep inside, in chambers cut from bedrock and sealed behind massive granite blocks, the pharaohs were laid to rest. Gold gleamed in the darkness, jewelry set with lapis lazuli the color of night sky, furniture inlaid with ebony and ivory, alabaster vessels containing precious oils, model boats to sail the celestial waters, loaves of bread and jars of beer to nourish the deceased in the afterlife. The pyramid grew, dominating the desert plateau, its white limestone casing stones polished until they reflected sunlight like a mirror, visible for miles in every direction, a beacon proclaiming the power of the God King who commanded its construction. Death was not an ending, but a transformation, a doorway through which one passed into another existence. The body had to be preserved, kept intact, and so they developed the art of mummification, that elaborate process requiring 70 days from start to finish. Internal organs removed and placed in canopic jars. The brain extracted through the nose with long bronze hooks. The body cavity filled with natron salt to draw out moisture. Then finally wrapped in hundreds of yards of linen strips. each one blessed, each layer protecting and preserving. The walls bore hieroglyphs, those beautiful combinations of picture and sound, spells and prayers to protect the dead and guide them through the dangers of the underworld. The Old Kingdom pharaohs governed through an elaborate bureaucracy that reached into every corner of their realm. Viziers managed daily administration, their offices piled with scrolls recording grain harvests and tax receipts, work crew assignments, and legal judgments. Provincial governors controlled the nomes, each region with its own traditions and local gods, its own festivals and sacred animals. Priests maintained the temples, performing rituals 3 times daily at dawn and noon and dusk, offerings of food and drink and incense presented to the gods housed in their sanctuaries, statues of wood and stone and precious metals that were bathed and dressed and fed as if they were living beings. The heart remained in the body, for in the afterlife it would be weighed against the feather of Maat, goddess of truth and cosmic order. If the heart was light, unburdened by wrongdoing, the deceased would live forever in the field of reeds, that paradise where wheat grew 7 cubits high, and every day was a perfect day of harvest. In villages along the river, life unfolded with rhythms unchanged for centuries. Farmers worked small plots of land, planting wheat and barley, tending cattle and goats, harvesting papyrus from the marshes where it grew taller than a man, its triangular stems swaying in the breeze. Fishermen worked the river at dawn when the water lay smooth as polished bronze, casting nets that came up heavy with catch, the fish still flipping and gasping, scales catching the early light. Women managed households, raised children, worked alongside their husbands in the fields during planting and harvest, ground grain in stone mortars, baked bread in dome-shaped ovens built of Nile clay. Scribes learned their craft through years of practice, copying out texts until their hands moved with unconscious precision, creating those elegant hieroglyphs that covered tomb walls and temple columns, that recorded history and mythology, tax records and love poetry, medical treatises and astronomical observations. But even the strongest kingdoms eventually weaken, eventually fade like colors bleached by relentless sun. After centuries of stability, the Old Kingdom began to fragment. Power flowed away from the pharaohs like water seeping into sand, dispersing among provincial governors who ruled their territories almost as independent rulers. Children played along the riverbanks, swimming in the cool water, chasing ibis through the reeds, learning the skills they would need as adults, the boys copying their fathers, the girls watching their mothers. Yet even in division, the dream of unity persisted. From Thebes in the south, new pharaohs emerged, gradually extending their control northward, reuniting the 2 lands and establishing the Middle Kingdom. These rulers presented themselves differently than their Old Kingdom predecessors. Perhaps the climate changed, perhaps droughts came, perhaps the massive building projects drained the treasury beyond recovery. Whatever the causes, the result was fragmentation, division, a time historians call the First Intermediate Period, when Egypt splintered into competing power centers and no single pharaoh controlled the entire land. The Middle Kingdom pharaohs pushed Egypt's borders southward into Nubia, that land of gold mines and exotic trade goods, building massive mud brick fortresses along the Nile to control trade and defend against raids. They reclaimed land from the desert through ambitious irrigation projects, increasing agricultural production, filling the royal granaries. They emphasized justice and concern for their subjects, portraying themselves as shepherds who cared for their flock. The change was subtle but real, visible in the literature of the period, in instructions left by pharaohs to their sons, advising wisdom and mercy, warning against arrogance and neglect of the common people. This was a golden age of literature, when scribes composed works of remarkable sophistication and beauty. The tale of Sinew tells of a court official who flees Egypt in fear, who lives in exile among foreign peoples but never stops longing for home, who finally returns in old age to die in the blessed land of Egypt and be buried in a proper tomb with proper rituals. They sent expeditions to distant places to Punt, that mysterious land somewhere along the East African coast, returning with incense and myrrh, ebony and ivory, live monkeys and leopard skins, exotic goods that filled the royal court with wonder. Amenemhat and Senusret, names repeated through several generations. Pharaohs who built on their predecessors' achievements, who maintained order and prosperity, who commissioned beautiful works of art that survive still, statues of such power and presence that even worn and fragmentary, they command attention. The Middle Kingdom, too, eventually weakened, eventually gave way to another intermediate period. From the east came settlers, Asiatic peoples who established themselves in the delta, who gradually grew powerful enough to rule as pharaohs themselves. The Egyptians called them Hyksos, rulers of foreign lands, and remembered them with resentment even after they were gone. The story moved its ancient audiences to tears, and even now, across the enormous gulf of millennia, something in it still resonates, that deep need for home, for the place where one belongs. Senusret III's portraits show a face marked by experience, by the weight of rule, eyes deep-set and somber, mouth neither smiling nor frowning, but simply enduring, eternal. But the Hyksos brought innovations that would ultimately be turned against them. Bronze working improved. The horse-drawn chariot arrived, that devastating military technology that would transform ancient warfare. In Thebes, the Egyptian pharaohs built their strength quietly, adopting the new technologies, training troops, waiting for their moment. For more than a century, Egypt was divided again, foreign kings ruling in the north from their capital at Avaris, Egyptian pharaohs maintaining control in the south from Thebes. The new kingdom pharaohs were warriors and builders on a scale that dwarfed everything that came before. They expanded Egypt's borders far beyond the traditional limits, creating an empire that stretched from Nubia in the south to Syria in the north, controlling trade routes and extracting tribute from subject peoples. Finally, under Ahmose, they drove northward, besieging Avaris, expelling the Hyksos from Egypt, reuniting the land once more under native rule. This liberation marked the beginning of the new kingdom, Egypt's age of empire and unprecedented wealth. But the new kingdom also produced Hatshepsut, perhaps the most remarkable woman of the ancient world. In a society where pharaohs were always men, she claimed the throne and ruled not as a queen, but as a king, wearing the false beard of kingship in official portraits, taking all the titles and performing all the rituals of a male pharaoh. Thutmose III conducted campaign after campaign, his armies marching through Palestine and Syria, besieging fortified cities, winning victories recorded in detail on temple walls. The tribute flowed back to Egypt, gold and silver, copper and tin, exotic woods and precious stones, slaves and horses, wine and oil. After Hatshepsut came Amenhotep III, who ruled during Egypt's zenith of wealth and power. Tribute arrived from all corners of the empire, gold in quantities that seem almost mythical, worked into jewelry and furniture, layered onto statues and throne rooms until everything gleamed and glittered. Her reign was marked by peace and prosperity, by ambitious building projects and successful trade expeditions. She sent ships to Punt, bringing back treasures displayed proudly in her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari. That elegant structure of terraces and colonnades nestled against the limestone cliffs on the west bank at Thebes, a place that still breathes peace, still invites contemplation. His son would shake Egypt to its foundations. Amenhotep IV rejected the traditional gods, closed their temples, declared that only one god was real, the Aten, the solar disk itself. He changed his name to Akhenaten, honoring his chosen god, and moved the capital to a new city built in virgin desert, Akhetaten, the horizon of the Aten. He built on a massive scale, constructing a vast palace complex on the west bank with artificial lakes large enough for sailing pleasure boats, with gardens filled with exotic plants from foreign lands, with buildings decorated in colors so bright they seemed to vibrate, reds and yellows and blues and greens applied to walls and columns and ceilings. The art of the Amarna period, named for the modern name of Akhenaten's capital, broke completely with the Egyptian artistic tradition. Instead of the formal, idealized style that had dominated for centuries, artists created works of startling naturalism and intimacy. There he lived with his queen Nefertiti, whose beauty is legendary, whose painted limestone bust in a Berlin museum still draws crowds who stand mesmerized by her elegant features, her long neck, her perfectly symmetrical face. But religious revolutions, even those imposed from above by absolute monarchs, cannot overturn centuries of tradition so easily. When Akhenaten died, his reforms died with him. His young son took the throne as Tutankhaten, but quickly changed his name to Tutankhamun, honoring the old god Ammonius, reopening the traditional temples, moving the capital back to Thebes. Akhenaten and Nefertiti shone playing with their daughters, kissing them, holding them affectionately, scenes of domestic life that would have been unthinkable in earlier royal art. The pharaoh's body rendered with strange, exaggerated features, elongated skull and thick lips, narrow shoulders and wide hips, a physical form that scholars still debate, still puzzle over. That small tomb, so modest by pharaonic standards that it was overlooked and forgotten, survived intact through more than 3,000 years until Howard Carter discovered it in the 1920s and revealed treasures that astonished the world. Gold everywhere, layered on furniture and chariots, fashioned into jewelry and statues, covering the nested coffins that held the mummy. The boy pharaoh ruled briefly, dying in his late teens, buried in a small tomb in the Valley of the Kings, that barren canyon on the west bank where new kingdom pharaohs were laid to rest in chambers carved deep into the rock. After Tutankhamun came a succession of pharaohs, and then Ramesses, particularly Ramesses II, Ramesses the Great, who ruled for 67 years, who fathered dozens of sons and daughters, who covered Egypt with monuments bearing his name. The innermost coffin, solid gold, weighing more than 200 pounds. The golden mask that covered the mummy's head, that serene face that has become the very symbol of ancient Egypt, beaten gold inlaid with lapis and colored glass, gazing into eternity with calm, steady eyes. At Abu Simbel in Nubia, his workers carved a temple from a cliff face, fronted by 4 seated colossi of the pharaoh, each more than 60 feet tall, gazing out across the desert with the same calm assurance as Tutankhamun's golden mask. the same divine confidence in eternal power. He built more extensively than any pharaoh before or after, constructing new temples, enlarging existing ones, carving his name everywhere, on walls and obelisks and colossal statues, ensuring that his memory would endure. Ramesses fought the Hittites at Kadesh in Syria, a massive battle involving thousands of chariots and tens of thousands of infantry, a clash so violent that both sides claimed victory. Both recorded it in triumphant terms on their monuments. Twice a year, the sun aligns perfectly with the temple entrance, its light penetrating deep into the interior to illuminate statues of the gods in the innermost sanctuary, a feat of astronomical calculation and engineering precision that still impresses. The temples Ramesses built overwhelm with their scale. The Ramesseum on the west bank at Thebes covered acres, its courts and halls filled with colossal statuary. At Karnak, the great temple of Amunias-Re, he added the hypostyle hall, that forest of columns so vast you can walk among them and lose all sense of direction. 134 columns, the central ones nearly 80 feet tall, their tops carved into papyrus capitals, the stone covered with hieroglyphs and reliefs showing the pharaoh offering to the gods. After Ramesses II's death, Egypt entered its long twilight. Later pharaohs could not maintain what their predecessors built. The empire contracted, foreign powers grew stronger, internal divisions weakened central authority. The priests of Ammonius at Thebes became virtually independent rulers of Upper Egypt, while pharaohs controlled only the north. Eventually, the two powers negotiated peace, sealing it with a treaty and a diplomatic marriage. A Hittite princess traveling to Egypt to join Ramesses' household, becoming one of many wives, bearing children who would have Egyptian and Hittite blood flowing together in their veins. The gods blessing the pharaoh in return, an eternal exchange between mortal and divine. The 26th dynasty, ruling from Sais in the Delta, attempted a cultural renaissance, deliberately imitating old kingdom art and architecture, reviving ancient texts and rituals, as if by recreating the past they could restore its glory. But historical forces, once set in motion, cannot be reversed by nostalgia. Then came Alexander, young and brilliant, sweeping through the Persian Empire like a desert storm, conquering everything before him. Egypt welcomed him as a liberator, and he paid homage to Egyptian tradition, visiting the oracle of Ammonius at Siwa Oasis, where priests declared him son of Ammonius, a pharaoh in the ancient tradition. Egypt fragmented again into competing power centers, sometimes ruled by foreign dynasties from Libya or Nubia, brief periods of reunification interrupted by longer periods of division. The Persian Empire absorbed Egypt, making a province, extracting tribute, imposing foreign rule. The Egyptians rebelled when they could, occasionally establishing brief independence before being reconquered. The last pharaoh was Cleopatra, that famous queen whose intelligence and political skill allowed her to maintain Egypt's independence far longer than seemed possible. She allied with Julius Caesar, bore him a son, then after Caesar's assassination allied with Mark Antony, bearing him 3 children. After his death, his general Ptolemy took control of Egypt, founding a dynasty that would rule for 300 years. Greek pharaohs who adopted Egyptian royal customs while maintaining Greek language and culture, who built the great library at Alexandria and made their capital a center of learning. With her death, the age of pharaohs ended. Egypt became a Roman province, its grain feeding the empire, its monuments tourist attractions for Roman travelers who visited them the way modern tourists do, marveling at pyramids and temples already ancient beyond comprehension. The old religion faded as Christianity spread, then Islam. Hieroglyphs were forgotten, their meaning lost. Together, they challenged Octavian for control of the Roman world. And when they lost at Actium, when Roman legions marched toward Alexandria, Cleopatra chose death over surrender, dying as a pharaoh, maintaining dignity to the end, the last of that long line stretching back 3,000 years to Narmer. Now let yourself drift, let consciousness dissolve like salt in water. The river flows dark and eternal, carrying all history, bearing all memory. The pyramids stand silent under stars. The desert wind whispers across dunes that rise and fall like slow breathing. You're walking along the Nile at dusk, that threshold hour when day and night exchange places. The water reflects the sky, violet and rose and deep blue. Papyrus stems sway in the evening breeze, making a sound like distant rainfall. Somewhere a bird calls, a single clear note hanging in the air. Sand drifted over monuments, burying them, protecting them, keeping them safe through long centuries. In the Valley of the Kings, in chambers sealed in darkness, the pharaohs rest, their bodies wrapped in linen, their hearts waiting to be weighed, waiting for resurrection, for the eternal morning when Ra rises and life begins again. The green belt of cultivation stretches along the riverbanks, then gives way to desert, to sand that holds the day's heat, that glows warm and golden in the failing light. You can smell the river, that rich scent of water and growing things, of mud and fish and the green living smell of crops. Bread baking somewhere, smoke from cooking fires, the dusty sweetness of crushed grain. The air cools as the sun sinks below the western cliffs. Shadows lengthen and merge. The first stars appear. Let yourself rest here, in this ancient place, in this peaceful hour. The pharaohs ruled for 3,000 years, maintaining order, preserving Maat, ensuring that the sun would rise each morning and set each evening, that the Nile would flood each year, that life would continue in its eternal cycle. A temple stands nearby, its pylons massive against the darkening sky. Torches flicker in the courtyard. Incense smoke rises from braziers, frankincense and myrrh, that ancient perfume that speaks of distant lands and sacred offerings. Inside the sanctuary, priests perform the evening ritual, offering food and drink to the god housed there, chanting prayers in voices that echo off stone walls. Sleep now. The river remembers everything and asks nothing in return. The stars wheel overhead, the same stars that guided Egyptian sailors, that watched over pyramid builders, that shone on Cleopatra's last night. Let them watch over you now. Let the deep peace of ancient Egypt settle over you like fine linen, soft and light. That same order, that same rhythm, still pulses beneath the surface of things, still holds the world together. Rest in the eternal present where all time exists at once, where past and future dissolve into a single endless moment. Rest, and let the darkness hold you gently until morning comes again.
The hills rise like the shoulders of sleeping giants from the warm earth of central Italy. 7 points of stillness in a land that breathes with the rhythm of ancient seasons. Long before emperors, before marble and legion, before the word Rome carried the weight of empire, there was only this: the curve of hillsides softened by wild grasses, the whisper of wind through olive branches, and a river that wound through the landscape like a thread of silver, catching the afternoon light. In the mist of morning, when dew still clings to spider webs stretched between the sage and rosemary, you might see how it was in that 8th century before our common era. Smoke rises from thatched roofs, scattered across the hillsides, the scent of wood fires and cooking grain drifting on air, thick with the drone of bees. The people who tend these small plots are Latins, one thread in a larger weave of tribes, the Sabines, the Etruscans, who have made this country their own for generations, beyond the reach of memory. The Tiber moved as rivers do when the world is young, unhurried, carving its path through red earth that smelled of iron and rain. Their hands know the feel of wooden plow handles worn smooth by use, the rough wool of sheep just sheared, the cool weight of clay vessels filled with wine pressed from grapes that grow on sun-warmed slopes. The tale told in later years, passed from grandmother to grandchild beside hearth fires that pop and hiss with olive wood, speaks of twin brothers abandoned as helpless infants and suckled by a she-wolf in a cave beneath the Palatine Hill. Whether truth or dream, the story reveals something deeper than fact, how a people came to understand themselves as chosen, as survivors marked from the beginning by destiny. On an April day, one that would be remembered forever as the 21st of that month, in the year we now call 753 before the Common Era, a man named Romulus is said to have traced the boundaries of a new city with a plow pulled by cattle white as cloud. The seasons turn. Wheat ripples gold in summer wind. Winter brings rains that swell the Tiber until its voice becomes a roar, its waters brown and urgent, carrying branches and earth toward the distant sea. This is the rhythm of survival, the eternal conversation between seed and soil, between human hope and the mysterious favor of forces beyond seeing. In those earliest days, Rome was nothing grand. Imagine instead the creak of wicker gates, the thatch that rustles overhead when wind comes up from the river, the morning sounds of goats bleating and children laughing and men discussing the best time to harvest. Homes built of timber and mud brick cluster on the hillsides, their doorways hung with cloth dyed in muted reds and browns. This is the age of kings, a span of 2.5 centuries that will blur into legend even as it happens. The first rulers concerned themselves with water and walls, with the placement of stones to honor Jupiter, who commands the thunder, and Mars, who governs both war and the turning of fields. The furrow he cut in the earth was a promise, a declaration that here, on this hill where a wolf had shown mercy, something lasting would take root. Between the 7 hills lie marshy lowlands where frogs sing at twilight and mosquitoes rise in clouds, places that will remain wild and wet for lifetimes to come. Time moves like honey poured from a jar, slow and golden. Rome grows. The Etruscans, whose cities to the north glow with wealth and knowledge, bring gifts of technique and beauty. They teach the arch, that elegant curve of stone that can bear weight beyond imagining. They show how to cut and fit stones so precisely that no mortar is needed, how to build temples that will stand for centuries, how to channel water through the city in underground passages that breathe with the sound of flowing darkness. They dig channels through the marsh to drain the standing water, slowly over decades, creating what will become the Forum, a space for gathering, for speaking, for the daily negotiation of life shared among neighbors. But power in the hands of one man grows heavy, corrosive. In the year 509 before the Common Era, following a tragedy that makes even stone seem to weep, the last king is driven out. The people choose something different, something new. A republic, a thing of the public, a state that belongs not to a single crowned head, but to citizens who will elect leaders to serve for fixed terms. The young republic wears its new identity awkwardly at first. Beyond the city walls, enemies press close. Rival cities whose own ambitions clash with Rome's. Mountain tribes who raid the valleys when harvest makes granaries full. Etruscan kings rule Rome in these later years of monarchy, commissioning temples whose painted terracotta decorations gleam in colors we have forgotten. Ochre and vermilion, deep blue like the sea at evening, gold that catches sunlight like trapped flame. 2 consuls will now guide Rome, each able to check the other's power, ensuring that no man can rise too high, too fast. This struggle between the orders unfolds over generations, a slow negotiation punctuated by moments of crisis and compromise. Within the city, tension simmers between the patricians, those old families whose names stretch back to the city's founding, and the plebeians, common people whose labor and blood defend the city, but whose voices carry little weight in its councils. While citizens argue in the Forum, soldiers march on dusty roads. The early wars are local affairs, fought between the planting and the harvest by farmers who put down their scythes and take up spears. Rome's enemies are neighbors, the Etruscan cities, the mountain Sabines, other Latin communities who watch Rome's growth with suspicion that hardens into fear. The plebeians win their victories one by one. The right to elect tribunes who can protect them from arbitrary power, the creation of written laws displayed in the Forum so that justice is no longer a secret known only to aristocrats, access to offices and priesthoods once reserved for noble blood. Each victory is a stone added to a foundation, making the Republic more than it was. Then come the Gauls, warriors from the north whose arrival feels like a nightmare, made flesh. They sweep through Italy with the force of a summer storm, their long swords and wild battle cries overwhelming a Roman army at the River Allia. The city burns. Victory comes measured in miles. Each battle a test of endurance, each siege a contest of wills that may last through seasons of heat and cold. From those ashes, Rome rebuilds. Year by year, campaign by campaign, it brings the other peoples of Italy under its authority. But Rome conquers with a peculiar genius. It offers membership, not just submission. Some defeated communities receive full citizenship, their people becoming Romans in law and privilege. Others become allies, autonomous but bound to provide soldiers when Rome calls. For months, Gauls besiege the capital while Romans huddle on that sacred hill, starving and desperate, until finally they pay gold for the invaders to leave. The memory of that humiliation burrows deep, a wound that will never fully heal, making Romans forever vigilant, forever preparing for the next threat. By the middle of the 3rd century before the Common Era, all of peninsular Italy, south of the Po River, answers to Rome in one way or another. The city itself has swelled to perhaps 100,000 souls. Stone has replaced timber, tile has replaced thatch, and aqueducts stride across the countryside on arches that seem too delicate to bear the weight of water they carry from distant springs. Then Sicily, that island lying just beyond the toe of Italy's boot, draws Rome into a larger world. The western part belongs to Carthage, a merchant city on the North African coast grown wealthy beyond measure on trade that spans the Mediterranean. When conflict erupts in 264 before the Common Era, Rome faces an enemy unlike any it has known. Still others receive a status between, a partial belonging with the promise of more. This flexibility, this willingness to embrace yesterday's enemy as tomorrow's citizen, becomes Rome's secret strength. The Forum is paved now, surrounded by temples where incense smoke rises to gods who seem to smile on Roman fortune. Carthage commands the sea with fleets of ships rowed by thousands of oarsmen, vessels that can ram and sink enemy galleys or grapple and board them with marines. The peace lasts a single generation before war erupts again, and this time Carthage sends Hannibal. His plan is audacious beyond reason. March an army from Spain, through Gaul, over the Alps themselves, and descend into Italy to fight Rome on its own soil. Rome builds ships, hundreds of them. It trains crews who have never seen the sea. It learns through disaster and determination, losing entire fleets to storms and enemy action, but always building more, always trying again. For 23 years, the war grinds on, exhausting both sides until finally Carthage yields Sicily and Rome finds itself master of its first overseas province. In autumn 218, he does exactly this, bringing war elephants over mountain passes where snow already lies deep, emerging into the Po Valley like a force from legend. But Rome refuses to surrender. The Senate will not negotiate while an enemy stands on Italian soil. New armies are raised from boys barely old enough to carry a shield and old men who had thought their fighting days behind them. Roman strategy changes. Instead of meeting Hannibal in open battle, generals shadow his army, cutting supply lines, denying him the decisive confrontation he needs. For 16 years, Hannibal campaigns in Italy, winning battle after battle with tactical brilliance that makes him seem more than human. At Cannae, in the heat of an August day, he surrounds and destroys a Roman army of 70,000 men in a masterpiece of battlefield choreography. Many of Rome's Italian allies defect, believing the war is lost. The city prepares for siege. The war shifts to other theaters. A young general named Scipio conquers Spain, then carries the fight to Africa itself, forcing Carthage to recall Hannibal to defend his homeland. The next 50 years see Rome drawn eastward like a swimmer caught in a current. Wars against Macedon lead to wars against the Seleucid Empire, that vast realm carved from Alexander's conquests. Roman legions march through Greece, where philosophy was born, through Asia Minor, where ancient civilizations left temples older than Rome itself. They meet at Zama in 202, Hannibal and Scipio, and there on African soil Scipio wins. Carthage surrenders Spain and its navy, agrees to pay tribute for decades, accepts limitations on its sovereignty. Rome emerges as master of the Western Mediterranean, exhausted but unbroken, its reputation for stubborn endurance now legendary. In conquering Greece, Rome finds itself conquered in turn by Greek culture. Aristocrats commission Greek tutors for their children, fill their homes with Greek statues and paintings, Greek books copied onto papyrus or parchment. They build houses around courtyards with columns and fountains in the Greek style. By mid-2nd century before the Common Era, Rome controls or dominates nearly every shore of the Mediterranean. Carthage, which has rebuilt some prosperity despite its defeat, is destroyed completely in 146, its buildings razed and earth sown with salt in a ritual curse. They defeat phalanxes in cavalry, war elephants in chariots, armies commanded by generals who have read treatises on warfare that Romans have never heard of. Roman literature begins to bloom in Latin, but following Greek forms, epics and histories, comedies and tragedies, poetry that sings of love and war. Success brings corruption. Wealth pours into Rome from conquered provinces, tribute and plunder, slaves and precious goods. The gap widens between rich and poor. Small farmers, once the backbone of the army, sell their land and drift to the city, where they join crowds dependent on grain distributions and public entertainments. The last century of the Republic becomes a spiral toward chaos. Ambitious generals command armies whose loyalty is increasingly personal rather than to the abstract ideal of the state. The Gracchi brothers, tribunes who try to redistribute land to the poor, are murdered by conservative opponents. The same year, Roman forces destroy Corinth and Greece, demonstrating that no city, however glorious its past, is immune to Roman wrath if it defies Roman will. The political system creaks under pressures it was never designed to bear. Pompey clears the Mediterranean of pirates, conquers the East, returns to Rome as its most powerful man. Julius Caesar conquers Gaul in campaigns of stunning brilliance, writing dispatches in elegant Latin that serve as both military reports and political propaganda. The Civil War ranges across the empire. Caesar defeats Pompey at Pharsalus in Greece. Pompey flees to Egypt and is murdered as he steps ashore, his severed head presented to Caesar in a scene that makes even the victor weep. Caesar becomes dictator, reforms the calendar, plans new campaigns, accumulates power and honors. Marius reforms the army, opening it to propertyless men and creating professional legions that will conquer Gaul and Britain. His rival Sulla marches on Rome itself with his legions, an act of sacrilege that becomes precedent. When the Senate orders him to disband his army, he crosses the Rubicon River with his legions, speaking words that will echo through history. The die is cast. The assassins hope to restore the Republic, but they have only created a void. More civil war erupts. Mark Antony and Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, defeat the assassins and then turn on each other. Antony allies with Cleopatra, brilliant Queen of Egypt, last of the Ptolemies. Octavian positions himself as defender of Roman tradition against Eastern decadence. On the Ides of March, 44 before the Common Era, senators stab him to death, his blood pooling on marble floor. At Actium in 31, Octavian's fleet wins, and Antony and Cleopatra take their own lives in Alexandria. Egypt becomes Rome's possession. Augustus rules until 14 of the Common Era, establishing the imperial system that will endure for centuries. He reorganizes provinces with professional administrators, replacing corrupt governors. He creates a permanent army stationed on frontiers, with elite Praetorian Guard to protect the emperor. He beautifies Rome, boasting he found it brick and left it marble. Octavian faces a delicate problem: how to hold power without appearing to destroy the Republic. His solution is a masterwork of political theater. He claims to restore the Republic while retaining control of army, provinces, and finances. The Senate grants him the name Augustus, the revered one, and powers that make him emperor in all but name, while preserving republican forms. Under Augustus and his successors, the empire reaches its greatest extent. Legions push to the Rhine and Danube, conquer tribes in Germania and Pannonia, cross the Channel to Britain, where mist-shrouded warriors paint themselves blue with woad. In the east, they hold the line against Parthia. Under his patronage, poets create works that will outlive empires: Virgil's epic of Rome's founding, Horace's odes, Ovid's tales of transformation. The Mediterranean becomes Mare Nostrum, our sea, and for 2 centuries peace and prosperity spread across its shores. This is the Pax Romana. Roads built for legions carry merchants and pilgrims, ideas and fashions. A merchant from Syria retires in Spain. A philosopher from Greece teaches in Rome. A soldier from Britain serves on the Danube and settles in Asia Minor. Latin and Greek become common languages binding diverse peoples in shared culture. The emperors who follow Augustus are varied. Tiberius, capable but dour, retires to Capri. Caligula, nicknamed Little Boot as a child among the legions, rules erratically before assassination. Claudius, despite physical disabilities, conquers southern Britain. Nero loves Greek culture and persecutes Christians before revolts drive him from power. The 2nd century brings what later ages call the 5 good emperors. Under Trajan, the empire reaches its greatest territorial extent, conquering Dacia and briefly Mesopotamia. Hadrian consolidates rather than expands, building his wall across northern Britain. The year 69 sees 4 emperors in civil war, but the empire survives. The Flavian dynasty restores stability. Vespasian and his sons build the Great Colosseum, that vast amphitheater where gladiators fight and exotic beasts are displayed and killed for roaring crowds. The 3rd century becomes a time of crisis. The empire faces pressure on multiple frontiers: Germanic tribes north, the new Sassanid Persian Empire east, internal chaos as generals fight for the throne. The empire briefly splits into 3 parts. Inflation spirals as emperors debase coinage. Marcus Aurelius is a philosopher-emperor whose meditations, written in Greek while on campaign against Germanic tribes, remain classics of Stoic wisdom. Yet challenges mount. Defending endless frontiers strains the treasury. Plague sweeps the empire in Marcus Aurelius's reign, killing millions. His son Commodus proves erratic, and his assassination in 192 brings more civil war. Cities that were the empire's glory begin to decline as trade contracts and the wealthy retreat to fortified rural estates. Yet Rome endures. Aurelian restores unity, reconquering breakaway territories and building new walls around Rome itself, acknowledging the city is no longer safe from external threat. Diocletian undertakes sweeping reforms, dividing the empire into eastern and western halves, each ruled by an Augustus with a junior Caesar. He attempts to stabilize the economy and reforms army and taxation. So night settles over the 7 hills where this story began. The Tiber flows as it always has, patient and eternal, its waters silver under moonlight. Constantine, victorious in yet another civil war, makes 2 momentous decisions. He embraces Christianity, which has grown from persecuted sect to significant force, making it a favored religion. And he founds a new capital at Byzantium, renaming it Constantinople, strategically positioned between Europe and Asia. The stones remember everything. The foundations laid 27 centuries ago still hold weight. Stars emerge one by one above the Forum, where generations argued and decided the fate of peoples. Above the Palatine, where emperors slept in marble halls. Above the roads that still stretch toward distant horizons, carrying echoes of legion footsteps. Let these images accompany you into sleep. The warm glow of oil lamps reflected in polished marble. The sound of a fountain in a garden courtyard. Water falling into water in endless conversation. The rustle of papyrus scrolls in some quiet library long ago, where a scribe copies words that will survive millennia. Rest now as Rome itself rests, eternal in memory, patient in stone, peaceful in this quiet moment suspended between past and future. Let the river carry you gently forward through the dark, its ancient waters whispering stories older than empire, older than ambition, old as the hills themselves. The night is kind. The stones are warm with the memory of countless suns. In ruins and writings, in laws and languages descended from Latin, in the very shape of our alphabet and the structure of our months, Rome endures, not as an empire of soldiers and emperors, but as a thread woven so deeply into the fabric of the world that it cannot be extracted without unraveling everything. The scent of rosemary and thyme on hillsides where sheep bells chime in the gathering dusk. All is well, and all manner of things are well, in this dream of Rome beneath eternal stars.
The scent of olive wood burning, somewhere in the fold of distant centuries, beneath a sky impossibly dense with stars, an old voice begins to speak. You are sitting where earth meets stone, wrapped in wool that still carries the warmth of the sun it absorbed during the day. The fire crackles and whispers, and in its amber light, shadows dance along cave walls that remember everything. Before there was light to see by, before the first breath or heartbeat, before stone or water or the concept of ground beneath feet, there existed only chaos. Not the chaos of storms or battle or confusion, but something older, something complete in its incompleteness. An infinite absence, a waiting. Here, where time moves differently, the stories begin. Picture darkness without the possibility of dawn. Silence that has never known sound. A space that extends forever in directions that do not yet exist. It was neither welcoming nor hostile. It simply breathed. If breathing is the right word for what emptiness does when it fills all of existence. Gaia came first, Earth herself, broad-bosomed, the old poets said, and you can almost feel what they meant, the sense of abundance and stability, of a presence that could hold all things without effort. She formed slowly, particle by particle, becoming substance where there had been none. Her body became the foundation, the possibility of place, of here instead of nowhere. Within that formless dreaming, something stirred. Not suddenly, not with violence, but with the patient insistence of mountains rising grain by grain over eons. The first shapes began to emerge from shapelessness, coalescing like honey pooling, like fog becoming solid, like thoughts forming in the mind of a sleeping cosmos that had just begun to dream itself awake. With her came Tartarus, though he remained below, deeper than roots could ever reach, a place of such profound depth that even speaking of it requires lowering your voice. A realm of essential darkness beneath the darkness, the lowest point in all creation. Every mountain that would ever thrust up toward sky, every valley that would cradle morning mist like a held breath, every field of wild grain bending beneath wind, every stone, every handful of dark soil, every grain of sand on shores not yet imagined. All of this was her body, her presence, her patient flesh becoming the world. And Eros emerged, not the cherubic child of later imagination, but something primal and necessary. The force that draws things together, that creates union from separation, that makes two become one, that ensures nothing remains forever alone in the dark. From her own substance, Gaia brought forth Uranus, the sky. Imagine him spreading outward and upward, spangled with lights that had never been seen before, creating the first ceiling, the first dome, the first sense of above. He stretched himself across all that existed, his presence the complement to hers, height answering depth, air meeting earth. From their union, children, the first generation born rather than manifested, emerging into a world still learning its own rules. the Titans came, 12 beings of enormous power and presence, each one embodying forces that would shape everything that followed. These first beings existed before sequence, before cause followed effect, before yesterday and tomorrow meant anything at all. They simply were present in that first slow awakening of everything, where he pressed down to meet her, where sky bent to touch ground in that first embrace. The world held its breath. There was Hyperion, who would father the sun itself, carrying within him the potential for light. Thea came luminous and fair, divine radiance before radiance had a name. Ceus and Crius, whose natures were subtle but essential, like the spaces between stars. Oceanus appeared, the great river that encircled all land. His waters endless, deep, cold in some currents and warm in others, moving always, patient as the turning of ages. His voice was the sound of waves, and his thoughts were as vast as his waters. Rhea formed like flowing water, like time itself made tangible, her very name a whisper of movement and change. Themis arrived, bringing with her the first concepts of law and order, the idea that actions might have proper sequences, that some things were right and others were not. Iapetus emerged, tall and strong, from whose line would spring both the defiant Prometheus and Atlas, who would hold up the sky, shoulders bearing unimaginable weight for eternity. Mnemosyne became memory itself, a living repository, holding within her vast mind every moment that had occurred, every word spoken, every gesture made, recording it all in chambers of thought that never forgot, never failed. Phoebe shone with silvery light, carrying prophecy in her eyes, seeing threads of future tangled with threads of past. Tethys joined with Oceanus, and together they would birth every river, every stream, every freshwater source that would ever flow across Earth's surface, veins of water carrying life into every corner of existence. But Gaia and Uranus created others as well, children who troubled the order of things. 3 Cyclopes emerged, brothers each bearing a single enormous eye in the center of his forehead, that eye capable of seeing things invisible to normal sight. Brontes, whose name meant thunder, Steropes, lightning, Argesh, brightness. Among these titans were 2 whose story would echo through all the ages that followed. Cronus, the youngest, clever and cunning, his mind always turning like wheels within wheels. And Rhea of the flowing grace, who would become his bride and bear children who would shake the pillars of heaven. They possessed knowledge of storm and flash and illumination, secrets of power that made them formidable and strange. Uranus looked upon these youngest children and felt fear bloom in his immortal chest. They were too powerful, too strange, too much. In his fear, he committed the first wrong, the first crime of the newborn cosmos. After them came the Centimanes, 3 brothers of overwhelming might, each possessing 100 arms and 50 heads. Their names Cottus, Briareus, and Gyges. Imagine them, these beings of multiplied power, able to see in 50 directions simultaneously, to reach with 100 hands, to hold and strike and grasp with force that made mountains seem fragile. Gaia felt them there, trapped in the darkness of her own flesh. She felt every movement they made in their imprisonment, felt their confusion and pain, felt the weight of them pressing against her from within. Her suffering grew day by day, a constant ache, a mother's agony at having her children stolen from light and freedom. He seized the Cyclopes and Centimanes and thrust them back down into the secret places within Gaia's body, forcing them into deep caverns beneath the surface of the world where they could not emerge, where their power would remain contained, where they could pose no threat to his dominion. She groaned with the burden, and the sound of her groaning was the first earthquake, the first trembling of the world's foundation. In her pain, she conceived a plan. From her own substance, she created a great sickle, forging it from adamant, a metal that had not existed before, harder than anything, with an edge that could cut through any substance, even the divine flesh of immortal beings. The sickle gleamed with potential, heavy and balanced and terrible. The Titans stepped back, one by one, unwilling to raise a hand against their father, against the vast sky that arched above them. All except Cronus. The youngest stepped forward. Some say he did so from love of his mother, from compassion for her pain. She gathered her Titan children and spoke to them of her suffering. Her voice carried the weight of mountains, the patient strength of earth itself, but also the trembling of barely contained anguish. She asked which among them would be brave enough, strong enough, willing to free their trapped siblings and punish Uranus for his cruelty. Others whisper that he saw opportunity gleaming like the edge of the sickle itself, saw a chance for power, for dominion, for the throne of creation. Perhaps both were true. The human heart and the Titan heart contains multitudes. The sickle cut. Divine blood spilled. Uranus cried out, a sound that rang across the empty spaces of the cosmos. And he pulled away, retreating upward into the high air, withdrawing from Gaia forever. The separation was complete. Sky and earth, which had been joined, now stood apart, and in that space between them, the world as it would become could finally breathe. That night, when Uranus descended as he did each evening to spread himself over Gaia in darkness, Cronus waited at the edge of the world. Hidden, silent, the sickle gripped in his hand, he watched his father approach. The moment came. Cronus struck. The blood that fell from wounded Uranus was not wasted. Where it struck the earth, life sprang forth. The Furies emerged, terrible and necessary, goddesses of vengeance with serpents coiling in their hair, their eyes burning with purpose. They would forever pursue those who committed crimes against family, against the bonds of blood, their presence a reminder that some wrongs demand accounting. There was room now for atmosphere, for clouds to drift, for birds to fly when birds eventually came to be, for mountains to rise without pressing against heaven's floor. Giants rose from blood-soaked ground, massive and fierce, their very existence a kind of ongoing violence. And where drops of divine blood fell into the sea's foam, mixing with salt water and wave, something beautiful began to form, though it would take time. From violence and sea foam, Aphrodite would eventually rise, goddess of love and beauty, proving that even cruelty can give birth to grace. It was a golden time, the poets say, and perhaps it was. Under Cronus's rule, the earth became generous beyond measure. Trees dripped with honey that required no bee to produce it. Streams ran with milk, sweet and nourishing. Grain grew without planting or tending, rising wild in fields that had never known a plow. Uranus departed to the highest reaches of the sky, never again to rule, never again to descend. Cronus took the throne. The age of the Titans began. Humans, who had emerged upon the earth by this time, lived without labor, their days peaceful and long, their deaths gentle, like falling asleep after a satisfying day and simply not waking, passing into soft eternity. But Cronus carried darkness within him. Both Gaia and the wounded Uranus had spoken prophecy, their voices heavy with foreknowledge. They warned him that as he had overthrown his father, so too would he be overthrown by one of his own children. Cronus took Rhea as his wife and queen. Together they presided over this age of abundance, this time when the world was wilder, younger, more generous with its gifts. When Rhea bore their first child, a daughter, Cronus looked at the infant cradled in his wife's arms and saw only threat. The baby's name was Hestia, and she was small and perfect and helpless. Rhea held her close, gazing at her first child with all the fierce love that mothers have felt since love began. But Cronus, driven by fear and prophecy, took the baby from her arms. The prophecy wrapped around Cronus's thoughts like chains, whispering to him in quiet moments, disturbing his rest, turning every peaceful hour slightly sour with fear. He had tasted power, had taken it with violence, and now he clutched it desperately, unable to imagine letting go. Despite Rhea's pleas, despite her tears streaming down her face, despite her cries that echoed across mountains and made the stones weep, Cronus opened his mouth and swallowed his daughter whole. Immortals cannot die. Hestia remained alive within her father's belly, trapped in darkness, conscious but imprisoned, waiting in a warm prison that should have been impossible. Rhea's grief was a physical thing, a weight that pressed on the world, a sorrow that changed the color of sunlight. The second child came, another daughter, Demeter, who would have become goddess of grain and harvest and the growing season. Cronus swallowed her as well, adding her to the living prison within himself. Rhea's heart broke again, the same wound reopening, never given time to heal. The third child, Hera, golden and beautiful even as an infant, met the same fate. Down into darkness she went, joining her sisters in that impossible captivity. The fourth child was Hades, the first son. Cronus showed no mercy, no hesitation. The boy disappeared into his father's throat, swallowed like the others. When Poseidon arrived, strong even as a baby, destined to command seas and storms, Cronus consumed him without pause. 5 children. 5 times Rhea had felt life grow within her, had endured the pain and wonder of birth, had held a baby in her arms for mere moments before watching that child disappear forever into Cronus's maw. As her time approached, Rhea traveled far from Cronus's palace, journeying to Crete, to the wild mountains of that island where caves pierced deep into living rock. She found a secret place, a cave on Mount Ida, or perhaps Mount Dicte. The old stories differ on small details but agree on what mattered. When Rhea felt the 6th child quickening within her, she knew she could not survive losing another. This one would live. This one she would save, no matter the cost, no matter the deception required. The cave was deep and sheltered, surrounded by ancient trees whose branches whispered in wind that smelled of pine resin and wild thyme. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, a patient sound, a measured counting of moments. She gave the baby to the nymphs of Crete, gentle spirits of nature who dwelt in forest and stream, who knew the secret ways of the wild. They accepted the sacred trust, cradling the infant with tender care. There, hidden from the sky and from Cronus's awareness, Rhea gave birth to her youngest son. She named him Zeus. From the first moment, there was something extraordinary about him. His eyes held intelligence beyond an infant's understanding. His tiny fingers grasped with unusual strength. Looking at him, Rhea felt hope for the first time since her sorrows began. To hide the sound of the baby's crying, which might carry on wind all the way to Cronus's ears, Rhea stationed the Curetes around the cave, young divine warriors who danced endlessly, clashing their spears against their shields in rhythmic percussion that drowned out any infant wails. They fed him milk from Amalthea, a divine goat whose milk was pure and rich beyond any mortal nourishment, milk that strengthened the baby, that helped him grow faster and stronger than any ordinary child. Bees brought honey, the sweetest they had, wild honey from flowers that grew in mountain meadows, and the baby thrived on this sustenance, growing visibly from day to day. With Zeus hidden and guarded, Rhea returned to her husband. She had taken a large stone and wrapped it carefully in swaddling clothes, bundling it to approximate the weight and feel of a newborn. When she presented this to Cronus, telling him their sixth child had arrived, he barely glanced at the bundle before opening his mouth and swallowing it whole, adding the stone to the children in his belly. The deception worked perfectly. Zeus grew in his hidden sanctuary. Months passed, then years, and the baby became a boy, then an adolescent, then a young man. He grew tall and strong, crackling with barely contained power, his eyes bright with intelligence and purpose. The sound of bronze on bronze, the stamping of feet, the shouted songs, all of this created a wall of noise that kept the secret safe. Cronus believed all possible threats contained, all potential prophecies prevented, and he returned to his rule, never suspecting that far away on Crete, a boy was growing who would undo everything. When Zeus reached full maturity, he left the Cretan mountains and entered the wider world. He sought Métis, a Titaness of extraordinary wisdom, one of Oceanus's many daughters. Her name meant cunning intelligence, and she possessed insight that could untangle any problem. The nymphs told him stories of his imprisoned siblings, of his father's fear and cruelty, of the prophecy that hung over his life like a constellation spelling out his destiny. Zeus listened to these stories and planned, his mind turning over possibilities, considering strategies, preparing for what must come. Zeus explained what he needed, and Métis prepared a special potion, a mixture of herbs and substances that would cause even an immortal stomach to rebel, to reject what it contained, to force everything up and out. Cronus's immortal body revolted against what it contained. His stomach heaved. He began to vomit, unable to stop, unable to control what was happening. First came the stone, which had been swallowed last, and it fell to earth where it would later be set at Delphi as a monument, a reminder of Zeus's cunning and victory. Then came Poseidon, emerging fully grown, powerful, his eyes flashing with the storms he would command. Hades followed, dark and imposing, carrying already the gravity of the realm he would rule. Hera came forth, regal and beautiful, her bearing queenly even in this moment of strange rebirth. Demeter emerged, ready to teach the world about grain and seasons. Zeus approached his father. Some tellings say he disguised himself as a cupbearer, a servant trusted to bring drink to the king, and that he offered Cronus a cup containing the potion. Other versions say he confronted Cronus openly, that they fought, and in the struggle Zeus forced the liquid down his father's throat. However it occurred, the potion worked. Cronus, weakened and shocked, rallied the Titans to his side. Most joined him, whether from loyalty or fear or simple resistance to change. But not all. Oceanus withdrew to his waters, declaring neutrality, refusing to fight against either side. Themis, goddess of divine law, sided with Zeus, seeing in him the future, seeing that his cause was just. Finally Hestia, firstborn and last freed, stepped out into light she had not seen since infancy. The six siblings stood together for the first time, reunited after years of impossible separation. They were young and strong and burning with purpose, with justified anger at what had been done to them. They looked at each other, recognizing kinship, recognizing alliance, recognizing destiny. The war that followed would shake the cosmos to its foundations. For 10 full years, the conflict raged, and those years were filled with violence on a scale the world had never witnessed. The gods made their fortress on Mount Olympus, the highest peak, a mountain so tall its summit pierced the clouds and touched the realm of pure sky. Prometheus, the far-thinking son of Iapetus, whose name meant forethought, also joined the younger gods, his vision extending far enough to see how this must end. From this height, Zeus hurled thunderbolts, though these early thunderbolts were crude compared to what would come later, manifestations of his rage and power. Poseidon, even without his eventual trident, struck the earth and raised waves, called forth earthquakes that split stone. Hades moved through shadows, appearing where he was least expected, striking and vanishing like a deadly thought. The world trembled continuously with the violence of their conflict. Seas boiled where fire met water. Mountains crumbled under repeated blows. The sky split with lightning, thunder rolling endlessly like a conversation of angry giants. Forests burned. Rivers changed their courses, fleeing from battlefields. The Titans fought from Mount Othrys, hurling boulders the size of hills, calling upon forces of nature that scarred the landscape and changed the shape of the world. Atlas fought with terrible strength. Hyperion blazed with solar fury. The Titan forces were formidable, experienced, confident in their power. Mortal humans, tiny and fragile, hid in whatever shelter they could find, praying to whatever powers might listen. Their brief lives overshadowed by forces so vast they could barely comprehend them. Zeus descended into Tartarus, journeying into the deepest depths beneath the world, where light had never reached, where the very concept of light seemed meaningless. There, bound in chains of adamant, the Cyclopes and Centimanes had waited for ages beyond counting, imprisoned in darkness, forgotten by almost everyone. For all their strength and determination, neither side could gain lasting advantage. The war might have continued forever, locked in endless stalemate, had Zeus not remembered those first children of Gaia and Uranus, the ones imprisoned so long ago, before even the Titans fully ruled. The Cyclopes, grateful beyond measure, wept at their liberation. They were master craftsmen, possessing knowledge of making that went beyond ordinary skill into the realm of divine creation. They forged weapons for the gods, working in darkness, shaping metal that had never existed before. For Zeus, they created the thunderbolt, a weapon of pure lightning, a spear of concentrated storm that could shatter anything it struck, that could pierce any defense, that radiated power and authority. For Poseidon, they forged the trident, a three-pronged spear that could command all waters, could shake the earth itself, could calm or raise storms at its wielder's will. Zeus found them and broke their chains, shattering the bonds that had held them since the world was young. He offered them freedom, a place of honor, roles in the new order he would create, asking only that they fight alongside the gods against the Titans. The final battle was cataclysmic. Zeus stood atop Olympus, thunderbolt in hand, hurling lightning that split the sky, that struck with precision and devastating force. The air smelled of ozone and burning, crackled with energy that made hair stand on end. For Hades, they made a helmet of invisibility, a cap of darkness that allowed its wearer to move unseen through any space, to become shadow among shadows. Armed with these weapons, joined by the Centimanes whose 100 hands could hurl 100 boulders simultaneously, creating avalanches of stone, the gods pressed their advantage. Poseidon wielded his new trident, striking the ground and raising earthquakes, calling forth tidal waves from seas miles distant, bringing water to drown his enemies. Hades appeared and vanished, his attacks coming from nowhere, impossible to predict or prevent. The Centimanes were a force unto themselves, an army in 3 bodies, each one hurling stones in endless barrages that darkened the sky, that fell like deadly rain. The Titans fought desperately, knowing they were losing, fighting anyway because they knew no other way to be. The earth itself groaned under the assault. Cracks appeared in the world's foundation. Fire spread across entire mountain ranges. The seas rose in waves that should have been impossible. The sky blazed with continuous lightning, day and night losing all meaning in the constant illumination of divine warfare. Zeus cast them down into Tartarus, into that abyss as far below earth as heaven is above it, into darkness so complete it seemed solid. There they would remain, imprisoned, guarded by the Centimanes who had helped win the war, who would ensure no escape was ever possible. Finally, inevitably, the Titans broke. Their lines shattered. Their strength failed. One by one they were captured, bound in chains of adamant forged by the Cyclopes, chains that could never be broken, that would hold for all eternity. With the Titans defeated and imprisoned, the 3 brothers, Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, divided the cosmos among themselves. They cast lots, leaving the decision to chance or fate or whatever force guides such things. Zeus drew the sky and upper air, becoming king of gods and ruler of heaven. His position atop Olympus secured by might and by fortune both. Cronus was among them, the once mighty king reduced to prisoner, overthrown exactly as prophecy had foretold, exactly as he had overthrown Uranus before him. The cycle had completed itself, the pattern repeating, but Zeus would remember this and rule differently, would build something meant to endure. Poseidon received the seas, all the waters that covered and surrounded the earth, every ocean and wave, every current and tide, becoming lord of the deep and master of storms. Hades drew the underworld, the realm of the dead, the dark kingdom where mortal souls would come after life ended, becoming its somber king, its eternal warden. The earth itself and Mount Olympus were declared common ground, shared among all the gods, belonging to none and to all. The age of the Olympians began. Athena would spring from Zeus's head, born fully armed, goddess of wisdom and strategic warfare, her gray eyes seeing patterns and solutions others missed. Apollo arrived, radiant and beautiful, god of the sun and music and prophecy, bringing light and art to the world, his lyre creating melodies that could move stones to tears. His twin sister Artemis roamed the wild places with her hunting bow, protector of young creatures and wild things, her devotion to the untamed world absolute. Aphrodite, born from sea foam and divine blood, embodied love and beauty in all their forms, her power over hearts both mortal and divine matched by few. Ares represented war's brutal face, the violence and bloodshed, the rage of battle. Zeus took Hera as his wife and queen, though their marriage would be marked by conflict, by Zeus's many affairs and Hera's terrible jealous rages. The gods settled into their roles, their domains, their relationships with each other and with the mortal world below. These gods were not distant or abstract. They felt everything mortals felt, but magnified, intensified, freed from the constraints of mortality. They fell in love desperately, felt jealousy that consumed them, sought revenge that lasted generations, showed mercy that could redeem, made mistakes that echoed through ages. Hephaestus, the smith god, created wonders in his volcanic forge, crafting items of impossible beauty and utility despite his lame leg and scarred face. Hermes arrived quick and clever, becoming messenger of the gods, guide of souls to the underworld, patron of travelers and merchants and thieves, his winged sandals carrying him everywhere, his wit sharper than any blade. The myths that emerged from this age are countless as stars, each one a thread in the vast tapestry of Greek understanding, woven together into patterns that explained existence. Stories of transformation, of Daphne becoming Laurel to escape Apollo's pursuit, of Arachne turned to spider for her pride. Tales of punishment for hubris, of Niobe weeping for children slain because she boasted against the gods. Stories of love that transcended death, of Orpheus descending to the underworld for Eurydice, his music almost enough to bring her back. Quests for glory and redemption, Jason seeking the golden fleece, Heracles laboring to atone for crimes committed in madness. They walked among humans, sometimes in disguise, testing the hospitality and character of mortals they encountered. They took human lovers, creating children who bridged the divide between divine and mortal, heroes and demigods who would perform great labors and live lives of adventure and tragedy, whose stories would inspire and caution and teach. Listen now in the darkness of your room, and know you are connected to all those ancient listeners who heard these same stories, who found comfort in them, who used them to make sense of existence under the same stars that shine tonight. The details may fade as you drift toward sleep, and that is perfectly fine, exactly as it should be. These were not mere entertainment but explanations for how the world worked, why storms came and crops failed, why humans suffered and died, why beauty existed alongside cruelty, why life was difficult but still worth living, still worth celebrating. The world of Greek mythology stretches vast and endless, full of winding paths through sacred groves, populated by gods and heroes, monsters and nymphs, each with their own story, their own place in the great pattern. You need not remember every detail, every name, every connection. Let the words wash over you like gentle waves on a shore that has received waves since the world began, requiring nothing from you, asking only that you rest, that you allow yourself to sink deeper into comfort and peace, into the embrace of night and story. The ancient Greeks understood that stories could soothe as well as excite, that there was value in the telling itself, in the human voice sharing something meaningful in the darkness, in the passing of wisdom and wonder from one mind to another across the mysterious bridge of language and listening. Simply let yourself float on the sound of these words, feeling the weight of your body growing heavier, sinking deeper into whatever surface holds you, your breathing slower and easier, your thoughts quieter and farther away, like voices heard across a great distance, across ages, across the boundary between waking and sleep. The fire burns lower now. The olive wood has become embers, glowing soft and warm. The voice continues but grows more distant, blending with other night sounds, with wind in leaves, with the distant call of an owl, with your own breathing, steady and slow. Tonight you are part of that ancient tradition, a listener in the dark, allowing story to carry you gently toward rest like a boat drifting on calm water, moving without effort toward a distant shore where sleep waits with open arms. Tomorrow is far away, beyond mountains of hours you need not climb tonight. For now, there is only this moment, this quiet, this gradual release into sleep's kind embrace. The gods and titans watch over your dreams from their places in the ancient patterns, their stories complete for tonight, their voices silent, their presence a gentle weight like starlight, like the memory of sunlight, like the promise of rest. The old voice fades, the fire dims, the stars will overhead in their eternal dance, and you drift, held safe by the same darkness that existed before the world began. The same gentle absence from which all things emerged and to which all things return each night to rest and renew. Sleep well, peaceful traveler through mythic realms. Rest now in the space between stories, in the pause between heartbeats, in the soft darkness that has cradled sleepers since sleep began. All is well. All is complete. All is exactly as it should be. Rest deeply. Dream peacefully. Let go.